Hey everybody, and welcome to what is our next episode, second episode of Knock and Talk. I'm Matt Talbot, one of your hosts, and I'm here with my good friend Rachel Frost. We're excited to be back. And today, it's just the two of us, and we are going to be opening up a discussion. Really, I'm going to narrow it down to kind of the art and value of communication in various circumstances, settings, and contexts. And that seems like a very broad topic. But I'm going to punt it over to my pal Rachel here to kind of kick us off and see where this conversation heads.
So I think what we really want to talk about today, and it's something that we've seen a lot in the news, and what I've actually also noticed a lot on my social media lately, is how communications affect people, affect feelings, affect processes. You might be okay with the outcome of something, but the way that it happened, or the way that it was messaged, or the way that it occurred, made it uncomfortable, made you feel less than you should, made you feel as if, just terrible. You left leaving terrible rather than feeling like you could overcome whatever the issue or the problem or the concern was that it happened to be. Specifically, we started to talk about communication because we're watching this unfold. And I want to make it clear, because I think it's really important. We're not doing, and I've seen a lot of this in the news too. We're not internet sleuthing. We're not guessing what happened in Idaho, because we're going to be talking about the slayings in Idaho of the 4 college kids just a little bit in terms of the messaging from the police department. Mm-hmm. We're not going to second guess what the police department's doing, because if there's one thing I've learned, having been in the middle of emergent crisis situations, or even when I was working in internal affairs, when people have little bits and pieces of what's happening, everybody can form these great and grandiose opinions about what they think you should be doing. Whereas if they had the entire story and knew everything that was going on, they might feel differently. But we're not very transparent often as agencies, as people, as supervisors, as husbands, as wives, as kids, all those different things. And that lack of transparency oftentimes leads to that feeling or that information or that understanding where you feel less, or you feel like you don't know what's going on, or you feel like somebody doesn't understand you. And that creates unsafe environments. Now, of course, going back real quick to the overall, what brought this up was watching Moscow Police Department. And now the media has grabbed a hold of this like it's a dog with a bone, right? Oh, they messaged this first, and then they messaged this, and now they're messaging this. So no matter what's coming out of the police department now, you've just got the media going, oh my God, they've changed their story again. And that's why we decided, let's talk about communications, not even necessarily what Moscow Police Department is saying, but just communications in general, and how important it is to think about the messages, to think about the end result of the messages that you're sharing with people, whether it's in an employment review, whether you're talking to your children, whether it's national news, you're putting out a press release, right? The majority of our agencies, for anybody here who's professional, folks who are in the threat assessment world, or parole, probation, law enforcement, whatever, we put press releases out all the time. We think about the words that we put in those press releases. We try to imagine, like, how is this going to come off to the community and come off to the public? Did we do a good job of talking about everything while still being cognizant of the investigation, right? Because you can't just put all of your information out there. In fact, I can't stand it when people do that, as was recently done when we released the manifesto from the Walmart, the person who was just involved in the mass homicide at Walmart, the supervisor over there. I can't stand it when we do that. That to me only is, no one needs to read that. No offense. But we don't need to have all of that information. We can summarize it. We can provide it in a summary and say, hey, this was the motive and this is why. And if you want to include it in an after action report and someone wants to dig down deep and find that later, fine. But when we're putting that out in the ether there for everybody to see it, and so that the media conglomerates just jump on it and want to share all of those, messages and hurtful ideologies and things along those lines, that's when we have people who are in crisis moments or in, on the pathway to violence, who say, oh, look, that person thinks the same as I did, and look at what they did and look at how they did it. So that was a lot, but I think that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about all these components of communication. And when we're sending out those press releases, do we really have backups for what if it's perceived this way? How am I going to respond to that? And what's our favorite thing, right? Because we both have worked for government agencies along the way, and I don't want to talk specifically about them, obviously, but what's our favorite thing to say, right? Especially in law enforcement, no comment. We like to say no comment. We're not ready to discuss that at this time. Sheriff's department or police department or whoever department was unavailable to provide information beyond this little press release. Whereas, sometimes if we went in there and said, hey, we don't know the answer yet, but we're working on it, or let's take some questions and I'll try to answer them as honestly as possibly. We don't do that. And sometimes that often we don't do that. I shouldn't say there's no absolutes. There aren't any, absolutes, but so often we don't do that. And that ends up creating a problem. And here we have this situation as we're seeing unfold with Moscow, where as their messaging changes, it's, and of course, what was the original message? Don't worry about it. It's targeted. It has nothing to do with all of you. And why would somebody want to say that? Why would an agent want to say that? They want to minimize panic. They don't want people to freak out. They don't want to come out and say, actually, it is very serious. We don't know who did it. We don't really have any information about what's going on yet. So be afraid, be very afraid. I mean, that's not something that they want to come out and say. So, understandably, they came out and said, don't worry, we've got everything under control. And then as information comes out, people jump on that information and say, wait, that's not what you said before.
Yeah, well, there's a definite moral panic that exists anyway about the things that we talk about and we work with a lot in these kind of mass casualty events that are pretty rare, like we've discussed, and you bring up a really important point about communication and give a couple examples. One, in terms of communication being influential and not always in the best way, we look at the incident that happened at the Tops grocery store up in Buffalo. The individual there likewise had a manifesto. 60% of what he documented in his manifesto was verbatim taken from the manifesto from the Christchurch shooter in New Zealand. So you can see the influence. It's not a copycat. It's at least the art of imitation, the influence, because that document was made accessible. I think the revelation of the specific content of what the most recent shooter put out there from in Chesapeake in Virginia at Walmart, I agree with you. I question the necessity of sharing the entirety of that as opposed to kind of coming back with more of a synopsis to say, this is what we understand from the writings of this individual. Whereas if you put out the raw data, you are leaving it to the viewer to interpret what was meant. And therefore you're going to get thousands, if not millions of interpretations. And the reason that has to have careful
personal connection. When you're reading their actual words, you're getting that personal integration with that person that we're trying to avoid.
And a vulnerable person who may be considering something not so great, something violent, may feel that personal connection with that person. That could be the connection they're longing for, and could be to them the validation that, hey man, it's good, do this, I support you because I did it too. In that kind of diluted world, how they interpret it. And we don't know where they're going to run with it. We want to really focus, I think, even though there are different types of communication, whether it's in person, through writing, skywriting, but definitely in this digital e-media, e-world that we live in. I mean, some form of electronic communication is the number one way that we all communicate with each other, through email, through text, through post comments and social media. That's really the crux of how most of our communication and information is delivered and shared. I'm going to go academic here for a second, and not to bore folks, but to make this that it's backed by actual research. It's not just our idea. There's a concept called cultivation theory. It's not very old. The concept is almost common sense, where it basically says that the more that somebody is exposed to, in specific TV, but media exposure and the information that is shared, that is how most of us form the realities of different circumstances and issues based on what we hear. We will take fragmented pieces, we'll take sound bites, and we will create our own reality based on what is either most appealing, most attractive, most shocking, most frightening, the stuff that really stands out or that has some sort of emotional, visceral response or impact. We're going to put together to cultivate a reality that's maybe there's some truth that lies within this new concept. That's really quite dangerous, because then you're going to have a lack of agreement. Everybody's going to have a different concept of what reality is. Therefore, yours is different than mine. We don't agree. You're right, I'm wrong. And it actually seeks to spread greater animosity and distance between people. because we're more apt to say, why don't you and I see the same way, as opposed to what part of what we see, even though it appears different, is overlapping and shared. So the power of communication, how that can impact other people, whether it's making you feel good, making you feel horrible, such as in bullying and the words that we use to other people or what have you. But really the power of communication is so significant. And in the world and the work that you and I do, where we're doing everything we can in different contexts and settings to try to prevent these planned acts of violence, our success really depends on everybody else out there, the general public, being an active participant. And if they have a distorted reality or perception of what reality is, why people do things, and it doesn't just have to be violence, it could be anything. Why does someone choose to do this or not? Then we are going to respond in ways that conform to the reality that we've made of it. And that could be incredibly harmful, stigmatizing, consequential for those other people, because it's not necessarily fact-based. It's fragmented, piecemealed, and riddled with bias.
Well, and think about as well, in addition to that, the devaluing we have seen with and everybody knows this. Like, I don't want it to seem like, oh my God, this is like a super new concept. But I think it's really important to acknowledge the devaluing that we have seen because of the advent of electronic communication and social media, and where people can drop a soundbite and not see the look on someone's face and not experience the hurt that they feel because of what you said or how you said it, or because they find it funny or whatever. And that kind of devaluing overall that occurs on so many levels, even in professional emails at times, where people might say something quickly in an email that they wouldn't have said if their employee was in front of them or if their supervisor was in front of them. But for certain, in terms of the social aspect, or, for people that you don't even know, right? We allow people that we don't even know who may make a comment on something we've shared, or you're engaging in a discussion or discourse with someone on a completely separate, issue that's out in the public eye, and this person disagrees with you or says something so horrifying or heinous to you that you feel the need to, respond. And so therefore they respond to you. And that affects you as a person. It affects you emotionally. It affects you, what your confidence is sometimes from someone that you don't even know. We're devaluing. And when it comes all down to it, this concept of the communication and devaluing, it all comes down to, because we're not getting rid of our iPhones. We're not getting rid of our Galaxies. We're not getting rid of, obviously we're recording right now in two separate states on electronics, and it's only going to become more and more part of our life and who we are. So then again, so how do you target that? But when it comes down to it, it really is about kindness and respect. And those are the things that we're missing, and empathy, right? And understanding other people's perspectives and experiences. That's why I really like the Choose Love program from the Jesse Lewis Foundation, which is it was one of the children who was, obviously tragically killed in Sandy Hook. His mother started the Choose Love Foundation. And this is curricula that starts with kindergarten all the way up into high school, that teaches kids to care. It teaches them to care and think in ways that encourages other children to share their experiences. And of course we could go down the rabbit hole of adverse childhood experiences and how this affects everything that we do, but a topic for another time. But this program is great. And I used parts of this program. You can, if you Google Choose Love, or maybe we could include the link or something along those lines in our podcast here. The curriculum, it's very specific. Kindergartners get theirs first, second, third, and so on. And I used it with my kids growing up because it started conversations that I was like, I didn't even know I should have this conversation with my kid. But this is a great idea. This is a great example. And knock on wood, my kids say thank you and please, and they want to know how you're doing, and they want to help you pick stuff up, and I ask them to help me with work, and they don't mind doing that. We're still working on electronic communication and how to do it effectively. But this all goes down to everything that we're talking about, whether it's electronic or not. It all comes down to really what's going on with us as a society, that we've stopped being kind. We've stopped teaching people to debate in a respectful way. We stopped teaching people to understand someone else's perspective instead of just our own. You know, it's like the comedian Sebastian Maniscalco. He's always like, I don't want to be that guy. You know, I don't want to be the one holding up the line for 12 people. I'm doing a terrible Sebastian Maniscalco impression.
That's okay. I'm gonna do a plug for him. I'm a big fan. He's got a new Netflix special coming out December 6th.
Yay! Let's plug it because I love it too. I was watching one of his older ones last night before he got married with a kid and everything, and I love it, of course, because he's my people, right? I'm from the East, so. But this special that I was watching was talking about. I don't want to be the guy that's creating all this weight or time for everybody else. But lots of people have forgotten that, right? We've kind of forgotten that the world is not just about our little box. There's all these other people in it. They experience it differently than we do. And it's okay. It's okay that they have a different perspective and experience than we do. And it might take it, right? That whole concept of until you've walked a mile in their shoes. We've stopped really teaching that. And I can tell you, I mean, I see kids like this all the time, right? And they walk everywhere and they're doing everything, you know, and I'm not the first person to say that, you know, we're constantly in depth in our electronics, but we've got to put it down. We have got to be at dinner. And don't get me wrong, I get it. Parent out there who has the 2-year-old who just needs a 15-minute break, you plug in Frozen on that thing all day long. Okay, I get it.
Whatever you need, that virtual babysitter.
10 or 11 years old, you know, and your parents, and you're out at dinner and everybody's just scrolling through their phone and nobody's talking to each other, put it down. We have got to start encouraging that as much as possible because we're losing the capacity to care. Because all we are
you're not allowing yourself
cares about you, right? Doesn't care about anyone else about what you're experiencing.
But you're not allowing yourself also to create memories and impressions of what you're doing in the moment. I don't know when the last time, I think it's recent, you went to a show. I think you saw Elton out there, right? I think that was your last show. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a second reference, I think Carrie was mine. And I was really very aware of immediately the lights go down and it was lit up because every camera was up. And I get it. You go on YouTube and you see everybody has recorded the entirety of these live shows. Like but you weren't there. You weren't present. I think that's another problem. You were looking at it through this. Yeah, is that we lose our ability to be present. I'm at full, not a hypocrite. I am guilty of that. But I do think we're at a point where if it's not done, and I'm not the expert in this, that we almost have to treat our connection, our relationship with electronics like we would to an addiction. And to have to kind of taper that and kind of progressively try to remove that. And, you know, some people try to go off the grid and like, oh, I'm going to go somewhere remote. And as soon as they come back, what are they doing? Probably checking everything they've missed. They're scrolling back to weeks of Instagram posts or whatever it might be. And, you know, I think communication, you brought up a couple points that obviously a lot. You mentioned the Jesse Lewis program, and we'll put a link for that here. But when you talk about teaching kids to care, I've got an almost 5-year-old. We're really big on manners and teaching that and don't lie and things like that kids will do, which is just normal. But, you know, what does it actually mean to care? Is it the same when you were a kid, when I was a kid, or kids nowadays? Does it look the same? I think one is you almost have to operationalize what is that all about. And as you and I were kind of talking about right before we started recording today, and I've talked about with my wife and a few peers this week in particular, is I'm going to be very bold here. And I'm like, why is everybody just treating everyone else like shit these days? It just seems like people are really inconsiderate, not even just the way that they talk to one another. I mean, you call customer service or something, it's like no one cares. I'm driving on the road here. People drive like no one else is there. They cut over lanes. They don't let you in. No one waves and says thank you. You could hold the door. And I'm saying this isn't just kids. I can forgive a child who may be in the process of learning how to interact in the social world. But I'm talking about full-grown adults, you know, and I don't really, and it's not about where you come from, what your background is, your level of education. Like civility and kindness, I think, are a hybrid of things that are part of what it means to be human. And I think it's also part of what can be conditioned or deconditioned, depending on your lived experiences. I don't think there's one answer to this, what it means to be respectful, what it means to be kind, what it means to share. But I think my point is, I think nowadays we've got to really get back to understanding what does that mean in a modern era to demonstrate care, because can we even find anything that mirrors that? Because I will put this out there, and I'm open to arguments or comments on this video. Clicking like or putting a heart on someone's text or post does not indicate that you care. It shows that you scrolled through, you saw it, and you're acknowledging it. But do you actually care? Does it matter?
But if
and
you
for some
don't
people,
get those hearts or any of those likes, it makes you feel like nobody cares.
right? Why is that? Invalidated. No one loves me. Why did this post? I have actually thought about.
No one cared to look. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
you weren't worth this.
So I think what that means, if we can break it down, is we are fostering a culture of unhealthy narcissists. Now, there's healthy narcissism, there's pathological narcissism, which is the kind we typically think about when we think of narcissism. We're thinking of a negative. Right. But there is healthy narcissism. One, healthy narcissism allows us to be confident, to take chances, to do things, to have pride and confidence in ourselves that we can do things well. It doesn't mean that I think I'm better than, but sometimes we need a little bit of self-doubt to challenge ourselves to continue to move forward. If we think we're great at everything, we're never going to try to test what we might be good at, and we're just going to do things and we may not succeed, and we don't think anything of it because, well, it must be great, so we lack insight. But I think we're fostering a significant amount of unhealthy narcissism, and I think it directly correlates with the fact that right now, probably the number one public health crisis in our country, probably in this world. I'll keep it to the US because I'm not going to speak for others, but here is the mental health crisis, not the mental illness crisis, as I talked about before, but just people struggling with their mental wellness because of all these different pressures. And I think a big one is I don't feel validated because I don't have enough follows. I don't have enough likes. It's what am I being told in this electronic world?
But that's
it's really unfortunate.
That's the world we're letting everybody live in until we, as parents, as society, as a community, are forced, like you said it, the experiences create the capacity to understand and embrace differences. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good. I don't want to indicate that, all electronics are bad. I don't mean that at all. There's the ability then to also experience other people's lives through film, through videos, through conversations, through posts, from places we've never been before, from cultures we've never experienced before. There's this wonderful vastness of what we have at our fingertips now from the internet and from first-person communication, it not just filtered through the lens of media and filtered through the lens of whoever wants to tell the story, but from the person themselves. So there's this greatness too, this amazing ability to see things we've never seen before. But it is the actual experience of being with others, of connecting with others, of sharing what you saw, sharing what you experienced with someone who can give you visual, verbal, tactile feedback. Tactile feedback, right?
Yes.
That is what does it. That is what creates the lack of isolation, right? Because now we have real connection, real people. We don't, and I use my kids as an example only because, I didn't create them. They're creating themselves, but I hopefully guided them in a direction to help them along their creation journey. They don't have you can only have 2 hours, you can only have an hour with your electronics or whatever. But I will recognize, hey, we've been on electronics a bit today. Why don't we read? Never an argument, never, okay, well, whatever. My oldest, it doesn't make him a saint. They've been on electronics prior to that. Yeah. If I'd said no electronics ever, I'm sure we would have had a huge argument. But they are not, that is not the foundation for their everyday. That is not who they are. They're not walking out of the shower with their earbuds in and looking at their phone, right? And we're talking and having conversations and playing cards, and they're understanding, losing things, and they're understanding how do I explain loss, in terms of the human experience of whatever's happening. How am I engaging with my friends? You don't have friends, real friends, when all you're doing is playing your VR or all you're doing is on your iPhone. You have real friends from sitting down and shooting the shit and hanging out and doing sleepovers and jumping on the trampoline and, and I'm talking about kids, but
exactly.
I would have friends jumping on the dang trampoline too, or all, going to Las Vegas and seeing a show together and say, wow, that sucked. Why did we spend $150 on that? Or say, oh, that was amazing. I can't wait to share it with other people on my social media, and that's great, so there's so many great things and so many good things, but we have to get out of the electronics enough to include those experiences, to start with the foundation of people, and then you can add the layer of electronics. But if we forget the people part and we allow it to babysit our kids, whether they're 2 or whether they're 18 or 35, allow it to babysit our adults. We've got people who live alone in their apartments who now have access to the world, right? But they're realizing that everybody's out there living it. And they're not living it. They're alone. And they're isolated. And there's no connection. And there's not any, the editor in me goes nuts when I say stuff like that. But we have those people who they don't have the skills because they weren't either taught the skills or they didn't get the opportunity to experience them and realize when they failed, this is how to succeed in the skills of socialization. So when you finally we now have that generation that grew up or is growing up with the electronics, now you've got someone in their early 20s, mid 20s who maybe never got socialization. And didn't get the chance to fail when they were younger. And now they're in their mid-20s, maybe mid-30s or the young 30s, and they don't want to fail in front of everybody. And they don't want to, when they were a kid, they didn't realize that they were failing in socialization. They were just trying stuff out. But if you're not, and all you're doing is this, we're missing out.
Yeah, probably for a separate conversation, just a quick point. And you just said so many things I could go on there. It's loaded there. But I also think one thing we don't do well these days is we don't really allow kids to make mistakes and fail and learn from them. We are more quick to punish with a negative consequence as opposed to, letting it be a lesson. I mean, I had a good friend of ours, Gene Dysinger, a wonderful man, incredible professional in this field. For me, he said one of the most empowering, impactful, and I'm not going to get it right verbatim, and I remind him of this usually when I see him, that, he said to me more or less that, you're not an expert in anything until you've made enough mistakes to become an expert in your craft and learning from those mistakes. I think it's really important and healthy that we do that. And he, when I heard that, I was newer in this work, and it just gave me a lot of confidence that it was okay not to get everything right, because by failing and keeping going, it shows how much you actually care about what you're doing. So really valuable lesson. I want to share something, my background, mental health. I've done thousands of assessments and interviews, and mostly in crisis oriented contexts and prisons and so forth. And you cannot, and I'm thankful with this COVID era that we have virtual access to things like mental health services or medical services, that we can still access needs, through remote means. However, I don't think it will ever fully replicate in a way that's necessary sometimes to really experience and understand the other person's human experience. An example I often teach on and say is as trying to highlight the true definition of empathy. Have you ever sat in a room with somebody who, based on what they were saying or what they were doing or how they were acting, their behavior, they were so restless, they were so anxious that you became incredibly anxious, and you were like, oh my gosh, I need you to calm down. I need you to sit still. I need you to stop talking so fast. It's making my heart race. Or they were saying things such as, oh, I think they're so wonderful. They're so great. I'm this, I'm that. And you're like, oh, the narcissism, right? The arrogance is oozing off. And the first thing we think about is how aversive it is, or what the problem is, or why I don't want to be in this room with this person. I'm anxious. Get me out. They're so cocky. I don't want to be around them. Right. But instead, I think that creates an opportunity for us to say, wow, if I'm feeling anxious with this anxious person, imagine what it must be like to live in their shoes and feel that anxious. If how they're feeling can make me feel this way. Or gosh, they're so antisocial. They think the world revolves around them. They don't have to abide by rules. They have no friends. We're social creatures. That's how we thrive. So imagine what it must be like to live in the shoes of somebody, no matter how repulsive it may feel or how averse you are to them. But just imagine, what must it be like to live in a socially oriented world for us to thrive and not be able to healthily socialize with other people. I think if you can do that and you can see that the stuff that normally makes you want to move away, run away, look the other way, not engage, but still find a reason to connect and be able to see that what is making you want to turn and go is actually sad, as opposed to, oh, this is frustrating or annoying, but there's a sadness to it. I think that's how we are truly being empathic. And I think that's how we can find like the good in people that really need us to see it in them when they otherwise don't. So I think that often communication is not necessarily what somebody says, but it's the look that they give you. It's how much they're fidgeting. It's how much they're not looking at you. It's the affective response. It's seeing it and feeling it in person. Right? You can see tears. You may not be able to feel them. You can see anxiousness in terms of how it manifests, handshaking, whatever it is, but you can't feel it. But being close to another person, there is a different degree of a way to feel something that you just don't get through these electronic means. And what we get through our virtual worlds are often very disingenuous and inauthentic representations of reality. When you're with a person in a room, there are no filters. There is no enhancement. There's no softening of the skin to make you appear optimally on a Zoom platform, right? I mean, we have special lighting. We want to appear bright, right? But we don't have any of that. There's a rawness to it. And I think everybody is walking around these digitized, kind of manufactured, cultivated, influenced people, as opposed to just being organic and authentic.
Well, and so there's two things that you brought up. I mean, I think a really easy way to explain that is as a presenter, and I know you present a lot as well, where we train and talk to different organizations about threat assessment and domestic violence and different things like that, mental health, wellness. When you're online, when you're in a Zoom, right, you have to assume, or whatever your platform is, you have to assume that everybody's listening. You have to, as you present, whereas in person, you can tell what resonates and what doesn't resonate with your crowd.
Mm-hmm.
So you can talk and do your presentation for 2 hours and think you did gangbusters. And meanwhile, you don't get a single comment, crickets, or one thanks, or whatever. None of that's ever happened. Of course it's happened. Everybody, right?
Yeah.
But no, never. But if you're in the room, you can see if someone's like, hey, I'm just like this. And when they're doing that, and there's a bunch of people doing that, like every once in a while, people have to answer. We're in that immediate connected world, especially in the disciplines that we teach to. Some of those people have to actually answer that right now because it's about a case, or about an individual, or whatever. And you can't let this person or that person, hurt your feelings as a presenter or whatever. But if everybody in the room is looking at their stuff, or the majority, you're like, oh, what I'm saying right now doesn't have a ton of. I got to switch it up, and I got to go to whatever. And that's the difference between. It's not even connective in person, but that's a really easy way to explain that. And then I wanted to, what you were talking about, of that opportunity to see how someone's, not bad behavior, but different behavior could be viewed from someone who's trauma informed and someone who's opening up their lens and saying, you know what, I want to look at why this is happening, or how it makes that person feel, or perhaps the reason behind, the foundation behind, why are they saying this or acting this way or whatever? And does that then affect their message? And so therefore, should I take their message a little bit differently? I love that. And you and I've talked about that before, the idea of, and we have this in our profession, we have this in so many different professions, people who are trauma informed, who forget to be trauma informed, right? That's their job. It's their job to look at people's perspective from their view. And I call it perspective messaging. I'm sure there's another way to say it. To me, perspective messaging is when I'm talking to someone or engaging with an audience, I want to know, where are they in their world, in their life, especially when I'm working one-on-one with someone and trying to understand, how are they taking what I'm trying to say to them? It's not like someone standing up there going, hey, do this, right? And nobody's taking it in, like whether it's kids or work or whatever. I want to know what's their perspective, what's their world, so that I can message to them appropriately and get my message across in a way that they care about, in a way that they can resonate with. So, but when you're the trauma informed and you forget to be with either your employees or you forget to be with, people that you're dealing with and understanding their perspective. So it comes around, I think, to that communications concept to kind of, as we wrap down some of this, is that when we're talking to people, no matter what our audience is, whether it's one or a group, we have to remember to, when we said, kindness and respect, right? Whenever I teach leadership, I talk about, let your freak flag fly, but be kind and be respectful. Because if you can be kind and be respectful, but still be you, hashtag winning. You're pretty good. You're going places, right? Because then you're feeling confident about yourself. You're not going to allow anyone to let you feel less than who you are based upon, whatever they're saying. But when we're talking to people, we really do need to understand where they're coming from. We need to take the time to not knee-jerk react. And please understand that I'm coming at this from, number one, knee-jerk reacting in my house. When I'm too stressed, you talked about that a little bit. When I'm super stressed and I've got a million different things going on and I'm the person that orchestrates the house and I'm the person that orchestrates the 9,000 kids we have and all the other different things that are going on, or at least they're in the space and I'm cleaning up and, and I'm working on cases and I'm working on presentations. I can't handle extra stuff. Extra stuff hits my sphere and I'm just like, oh my God, you guys got to stop. Like I can't do it.
Yeah, it's overstimulating. Overstimulating.
And I can't do it. And everybody's like, you're mad at me. Like, I'm not mad at you.
Right.
I'm not mad at you. I can't take anymore. You guys you broke the glass. You can clean it up. You did this. You can do that.
You know what's sad too, though?
Sweep the floor.
What's sad too, Rachel, is even how we describe nowadays what you just described, we're using it in kind of digitized terms because we would say, yeah, you've run out of bandwidth.
Yes.
Right? You don't have any more bandwidth left. We all say it, I think, all the time. It's become normal vernacular for us. Like, that's just how we speak. Like, I don't have the bandwidth for more. I totally relate to what you're talking about. And, I hear this all the time, admittedly, like, are you in a bad mood? Like, what's wrong? And sometimes it's not even that. It's just feeling overwhelmed, oversaturated. If we think of our brains like a sponge, that they can only absorb so much before they start to leak. And I think anybody listening could probably relate to this, have had this experience, probably easily relate. But if you can't think of something, have you ever lost your keys, your purse, something that you're looking for? Like, where did I put my keys? Why don't you remember where you put your keys? Because you were probably thinking of 200 other things at the time when you put them down. So are we ever, this is an important thing.
All the browsers open. I totally.
Pop. This is an important thing. Therefore,
that's our unconscious communication, right? The way we showcase all that to the wife, the husband, the kids, the boss, the coworkers, the whatever. That's our unconscious communication. How am I, right? And they're perceiving it as you're mad at me. I'm like, well, I'm not mad at you. Right. And we all do that, right? Because the whole world wants to fit in.
But right? I also feel that happens more than ever.
One more time.
But this happens more than ever now, because if we're living in this, what I said before, if we believe anything I said to be true a minute ago, that we're living in this kind of world that's cultivating narcissists in less of a healthy way, then of course we're going to just be focused on what do I feel in this moment. Therefore, Rachel, your behavior suggests you're mad at me, as opposed to you must have a lot going on. Is there anything I can do to support you? You want to talk about it. But everything is personalized. I work, where I work and working in a healthcare setting. And we get a lot of our providers and practitioners saying that, the patient yelled at me. I didn't do anything. The first thing is, what did I do? As opposed to taking a step back and be like, okay, why would somebody who doesn't really know me, and this can't be personalized because they don't know me to personalize it, be acting this way? But we're not doing that. We're not thinking about that. And that immediately prevents us from doing any good to other people. And I think that in and of itself disallows us or hinders us from actually being kind to other people. I think if we can get out of ourselves, get past what we feel and what we want, then we're more apt to think about it through someone else's lens and through their shoes. That's where empathy comes in, kindness, compassion. But unfortunately, I'm not seeing as much of that. I've just seen it kind of go in the opposite direction. It's sort of baffling in a sense as to why, because kindness, care, compassion, love, whatever in that world you want to give it, is free of charge. It's easy to do. It takes way more effort to be mean and angry. It takes way more effort and time than that, as opposed to just being, I'm going to be kind and nice. And if I see something that's not going that way, maybe I can be the one to bring some kindness to the situation. Or
and I think
a lot
it's
of people
important
say,
real quick to just kind of to piggyback on that, because we do talk to a lot of law enforcement. We talk to a lot of like type A testosterone filled, and I'm right there, even though not maybe as testosterone filled as the next person, but that type A personality. The concept of kindness and respect, I want to just give it like a different view. That's the leader that you would go through fire for, because he treats you with value. He shows he respects you. He takes the time to understand the situation and what you're going through before making a judgment call and then talking to you about what's happening. He makes, or she makes, the tough decisions, right? So that's when we talk about, I don't want everybody who might be in professions like that to think, we're thinking that everybody should sit down and have a juice box and a blanket or whatever, unless, hey, that's what you need. I'm not against that. Like, if someone needs a juice box and a blanket, I'll go to Walmart and get you one, tomorrow or today or whenever you need to have it. But I really want to just kind of contextualize that for those. That's the team leader. That's the team member. That's the sergeant. That's the person that you want in your corner. The person who's going to be kind enough to give a crap about the work that you've put in. And if you're the person who's not putting in the work, and the goal is to get you to do the job appropriately and effectively, that's taking the time to understand why you're not doing it yet. And what can we work on in order to get to that point? You don't want to,
that's
as a
not happening a lot.
Right. We're not seeing that. And so that's where I kind of want to wrap up that communication. It's like, well, okay, what can we do about it? So as that supervisor, it's imperative, first of all, to find out what's really going on, not your knee-jerk reaction to information you heard from 92 different sources, but sit down and ask the person, hey, how was your day today? Or what happened? Or tell me about that call, or tell me about the situation, or tell me about that patient, or whatever it happens to be, whatever the sphere of influence is. Why don't you talk to me about that? You right? Tell me more about that. So that's from Interview 101. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. So you ask them to tell you more about that. You listen to it. You listen to where their head's at, why they did it. Say, okay, well, I understand we had this issue. Why don't you tell me how you feel about that? Get some of the information. Because on the way out the door, you don't want that person walking out the door, pissed off or angry that I got in trouble for something. You want that person, the whole goal is to remediate the issue or the problem, if there is one, right? Because sometimes we think there's one, and then when we hear those stories, we're like, oh, there's not actually a problem.
Yep.
This is what's really going on, right? But how bad does it feel when there's not actually a problem, but someone thinks there is, and then they just yell at somebody for it, whether it's a kid or an employee or whatever, or the community at large, right? They make you feel like crap about it, and then you walk out the door and go, well, this sucks, right? You don't want that, right? It's from the book Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement by Dr. Gil Martin, who says, this job will screw you. And I'm like, I think that works for every, he talks about it. He's like, this job will screw you, and you're going to get blamed for something you didn't do. You're going to get yelled at for something that wasn't your fault. You're going to get moved or transferred or whatever, and you're going to feel like it's personal. And just remember, in the end, you can stop giving 110%, but in the end, that's only going to affect you, because the job's going to keep going on and on. But as the supervisor or as the parent, I think it's really imperative, or as the threat assessor, whatever it happens to be, to really allow the other person to share their experiences with them, to try to understand those experiences, understand how they feel. What is your goal? What's the goal at the end of this conversation? What's the goal at the end of this case, or whatever it happens to be? What do you want to see? What's the behavior you're looking for? Okay, so how am I going to get that? Am I going to get that from, at the end of this person's like, well, I suck and I'm not very good at anything and you're mad at me.
Yep.
No, that's not going to change. Then you're going to have maybe a year, 2 years, 5 years. You're never going to get over that relationship's whatever. Versus if you took the time to be the team leader that someone's going to run through fire for, by making the tough decisions and actually showing that the person is valued and respected and they bring something to the table. Even if it's just the butter dish, okay, whatever it happens to be, like what's the good stuff they're bringing to the table, focus on that and then try to remediate the situation and the issue. It's so important that those basic, simple things of communication, whether you're in law enforcement or mental health or whatever it happens to be, I can't say it enough, and I probably said it in our last podcast, read a basic business book, read something about teams, read something about real leadership. We talk about leadership all the time. We give it great lip service, right? But we don't do the simple things about right? And especially sometimes in threat assessment, right? Being trauma informed in all that we do, not just in how we look at a situation, but how we deal with a situation, how we deal with people say, hey, I'm a person who struggles with, this mental health issue or this type of personality disorder or this type of whatever. And then, okay, well then how does that person message? I need to understand how that person message, not just get mad that they didn't message the way I wanted them to, right? We want to listen to all those different kinds of things. So I just thought, and maybe you can add in here just some components that we can do differently, we as society can do differently as we're moving forward in terms of communication. For me, take the time to find out what's really going on. Take the time to talk to the individual. Let them know that they're valued and that they're respected, even if it's a community, if we're messaging to the community, all the good things that the person is doing, as well as what we need to change moving forward. And then an action plan for doing it, right? You can't just say to a kid, get better grades. Right? You got to say, well, what's going on with your grades and why are they like this?
Yeah.
What can we do to fix them? It's kind of the same concept. So.
Well, I dare not elaborate. I think you've really closed this very well. I want to add one comment, and I think I speak on this a lot, and I'm going to kick it right back to you real quick to kind of close us out for the episode. But what you've put in beautiful words, I think really powerful and important for people to hear and for me to hear as well, is one thing that we get to do. I like to use this analogously, is we get to be a Rosetta Stone for human behavior. And I think that's a privilege. And I love thinking that way, that if we all speak similar yet slightly different languages, call them love languages, whatever it is, stylistic manners in which you communicate information, all of us speak a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to communicate and feel connected and feel involved and that we belong and we have a sharedness with at least one other person. So, when somebody is speaking, they're behaving in a certain way and you're trying to make sense of it, instead of just jumping to a conclusion about what it means, what they intended or what's happening, take a step back and try to take some time to translate it. Sometimes people will say things impulsively and it's not exactly what they mean. And we can take a step back and be like, is what they said what they meant to say? Or is there something else that they're trying to say, but they just don't know how? So I think that's a way to show that we care. That's a way to show compassion. It's really a way to make sure that communication is not lost in translation. But I don't want to belabor that because I really like how you phrased everything and everything you shared. So how do you want to take this home? What are your final thoughts?
Well, I just want to say, I think we're all guilty of having been in a position where we wish we could have communicated something differently or more effectively. That's why I truly do believe that transparency, wherever you can get it, right? We can't always be super transparent at times because we're worried about maybe liability as a supervisor, or we can't share that information with the public, or we can't whatever. But being transparent and being real means so much. And people can tell when you're being fake, right? And people can tell when you're being real. And that's kind of what we even talked about regarding the podcast. We're like, we're just going to go. We're going to talk in the same ways that we talk every single day because we don't want to seem contrived and like we're trying to break up our conversation, but just the way we would have a normal conversation. And I can say myself that I can look back on at least one very large circumstance in my career where I wish I had just stopped and said, hey, what's going on? To like maybe one person or another, like, hey, can we just talk about this? And we're so hesitant, right? We're so hesitant to just say, to look at someone and go, what's going on? Versus, my God, this person's pissing me off and this person's making me angry and this is happening and this bullshit happened over here and blah, blah, blah. Rather than, let me stop for a second. And looking inward, right? Oh, we don't like to look at, maybe if this situation happened here, maybe it actually, what am I doing? And if I don't intend to do it, how am I being perceived, right? If there's no intention to do things in a certain way or whatever, maybe the way we're doing it is perceived incorrectly. And so therefore we need to change the way we message so it's perceived in the way that we intend. So I think that's obviously this is a much more complex conversation to have over longer periods of time. But just to finish up for some of the communications components that we teach, value the people that you're around. Again, whether it's family or whether it's work or it's your community or whoever it happens to be, value them, respect them, expect value and respect back, right? Kindness and value and respect is so underrated and yet so important. And we're teaching that to our employees every day by our actions, not by just what we say. We have great policies. Everybody has great policies, but how do we live those things? How do we message those things to the people that we work with on a regular basis? We have to commit to them every single day. And that, again, is whether it's family or it's work. So just remember that those communications, whether they are nonverbal, whether they are verbal, they have meaning. And we need to take time out to let people know in whatever environment we're in that they matter. So we're going to take that time, because when we do that, we create safer environments where people feel valued, respected, needed, wanted. They don't usually want to commit harm there, right? That's the concept of, I think it was Dr. Reed Malloy, talked about, and many others, but talked about when you have people you care about in your life, you're not usually going out there and committing, huge acts of targeted violence, right? Because you're being cared about, you're being loved, you're being cared for. You have someone else to care for. So we have to remember that as our communications move forward, to try to create that wherever possible, and not just to knee-jerk react to things, but to actually figure out what's going on, take a minute to think about what our goals are at the end result, and then how do we communicate that forward so when that person or that group walks out of the room, they feel empowered to create change rather than feeling like there's nothing they can do and that they're just unliked and that they're just unworthy.